You're the most beautiful thing on this mountain." The rope creaked as it tightened. Snow drifted across the main street of Silver Ridge, settling on the boots of a woman who could barely stand. Her wrists were bound. Her breath came in sharp, panicked bursts. Around her neck hung a crude sign already splattered with mud and spit. "Runaways don't get mercy," someone shouted from the crowd. The sheriff adjusted his hat, avoiding her eyes. The judge stood nearby, calm, composed, hands folded behind his back as if he were attending church rather than an execution. And then the mountain answered. A single gunshot cracked through the air, not toward the gallows, straight into the wooden beam above it. The rope snapped. The woman collapsed into the snow, coughing, gasping, alive. Before anyone could move, a figure rode straight down Main Street through the drifting white. A massive man on a coal-black horse, wrapped in fur and iron, snow clinging to his beard like frost to stone. He didn't slow. He didn't look afraid. He dismounted in one motion and stepped between the crowd and the woman on the ground. "Touch her again," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the square, "and I'll break every bone in your body." No shouting, no theatrics, just certainty. Hands hovered over holsters. Boots shifted. The wind howled between buildings like it knew blood wanted to spill. The woman lifted her head, confused, terrified, her cheeks red from cold and shame. She looked at the stranger towering over her and whispered, barely audible through chattering teeth, "Why?" He crouched, blocking her from every staring eye. Snow settled on his shoulders as he draped his heavy coat around her trembling body. "Because," he said, close enough that only she could hear it, "you don't belong on a rope, and you don't belong to anyone who treats you like this." Behind them, the judge's face hardened. The sheriff swallowed. The crowd fell silent, realizing this was no longer a spectacle. This was a reckoning. And the truth was, this moment didn't begin here. It began years earlier, in locked rooms on frozen mountains, and with secrets powerful men thought were buried forever. Where are you right now? And what were you doing when you heard this story begin? To understand why the gallows stood ready that morning, you have to understand Silver Ridge. Silver Ridge was the kind of town that called itself respectable. Brick buildings, a white-steepled church, a bank with polished windows, and a judge who quoted scripture when it suited him. From a distance it looked civilized. Up close, it ran on fear, favors, and silence. The railroad had skipped Silver Ridge years earlier, so the town survived on mining loans, land deeds, and debt. And all three passed through one man's hands. Judge Cornelius Whitmore. Whitmore wasn't just a judge. He was the banker, the landholder, the quiet owner of most of the mines through shell names and temporary foreclosures. Men owed him money. Women owed him silence. Sheriffs owed him their badges. In Silver Ridge, the law didn't sit in books. It sat in Whitmore's parlor. People spoke his name carefully. And then there was Iris Whitmore, before the rope, before the snow, before she became the runaway. Iris was known as the judge's daughter, but rarely seen. When she did appear, it was brief and controlled, head down, heavy coat no matter the season, no conversation, no laughter. Townsfolk noticed her size before anything else, and they noticed her fear even faster. "She's sickly," people said. "She's simple," others whispered. No one asked why she never walked freely. No one questioned why she flinched when voices rose. In Silver Ridge, curiosity was dangerous. Iris lived in a house full of locked doors. She ate under rules. spoke under permission, and learned early that obedience was safer than hope. The town saw her weight as weakness. Her father saw it as shame. Neither saw her as a person. And then there was the man from the mountain. His name was Elias Crowe. Some called him Stoneback. Others called him the Hermit. Children were warned that if they wandered too far into the high timber, Crowe would take them. None of that was true, but fear spreads faster than truth in places like Silver Ridge. Elias lived alone above the tree line, where the air burned your lungs and winter killed the careless. He trapped, he hunted, he forged his own tools, and he spoke to almost no one. Once, years earlier, he had lived in town. Once, he had trusted the law. That trust had cost him everything. People remembered him vaguely. A tall man, scarred, quiet, the kind who stood at the edge of rooms. Then, one winter, he vanished into the mountains and never came back down except to trade hides or buy salt, which is why no one expected him to care about a runaway. But Elias had been watching Silver Ridge for a long time, watching the same patterns repeat, watching Whitmore tighten his grip, watching people disappear into debt, into jail, into graves marked with clean paperwork, and watching Iris. He'd seen her once in the market months earlier, her hands shaking as she counted coins. The bruises hidden poorly beneath her sleeves, the way she apologized when no one accused her of anything. That look wasn't unfamiliar to him. It was the same look his mother had worn before the law took their land. Before his brother was jailed for a crime he didn't commit. Before the judge signed papers and called it justice. Silver Ridge didn't run on cruelty alone. It ran on permission, on the unspoken agreement that as long as the right people suffered, everyone else could feel safe. Until the morning, the rope was tied. Until the mountain sent one man back down. And when Elias Crowe stepped into the square, he wasn't just interrupting an execution. He was walking straight into the heart of a town that had never been challenged. And Iris Whitmore, shaking in the snow, was about to become the reason everything cracked. Elias Crowe did not fear guns. What he feared was silence. The kind of silence that follows when the truth is buried under signatures and wax seals. The kind that settles in a man's chest after he realizes screaming will change nothing. That silence had followed him into the mountains and stayed there, whispering every night when the wind clawed at his cabin walls. Years before Silver Ridge ever tied a rope for Iris, Elias had stood in another square. His younger brother, Matthew Crowe, had been the one accused. A bar fight gone wrong, a man dead. The wrong witnesses paid to speak, the right ones too afraid to breathe. Judge Whitmore had presided over the trial, calm and efficient, declaring that the law had spoken. Elias remembered the sound of the gavel more clearly than the gunshot that followed the hanging. Matthew had sworn his innocence until the rope cut his words short. Elias had begged. He had brought proof too late. A ledger, a confession whispered by a dying man. Whitmore never even opened the envelope. He had smiled and told Elias that justice could not bend for grief. That night, Elias broke. He left Silver Ridge with blood on his knuckles from pounding a courthouse door that would never open again. He went into the mountains not to hide, but to survive the kind of rage that would have destroyed him if he stayed. Out there among stone and snow, Elias learned control, learned patience, learned how to live without needing permission from men like Whitmore. But he never forgot. And then he saw Iris. At first, he told himself it was none of his business. He'd learned the cost of interference. He'd learned what the law did to men who stood up too loudly. But memory has a way of clawing back when you see the same cruelty wearing a different face. Iris didn't look defiant. She looked exhausted. Elias noticed the small things others ignored. The way she avoided mirrors in shop windows. The way her hands hovered protectively over her stomach when men laughed. The way she never spoke unless spoken to, and even then, barely. That wasn't laziness. That wasn't gluttony. That was fear trained into bone. The night Iris ran, Elias was already tracking. He'd seen the dogs leave town, heard the whistles echo up the slopes. He followed at a distance, careful not to be seen, watching her push her body beyond what anyone would have believed possible. She fell more times than he could count. She crawled. She bled. And still, she moved forward. That was when Elias understood. This wasn't a woman running from embarrassment. This was someone running from a cage. When the storm hit, Elias found her half buried in snow, breath shallow, lips blue. He carried her without hesitation, muscles burning, heart pounding with an urgency he hadn't felt since his brother died. Saving Iris was not redemption. It was refusal to let Whitmore claim another life under the banner of order, refusal to stay silent again, refusal to become the man who watched and survived while others were destroyed. But Elias didn't tell Iris any of this at first. Instead, he set rules, clear ones. She ate when she was hungry, slept when she was tired. No locked doors, no raised voices, no commands. He flinched the first time she apologized for breathing too loudly. At night, when the fire burned low, Elias would sit awake, listening to the wind, reminding himself of his true fear. Not death, not prison, but the thought that if he failed her, the silence would come back, louder than ever. Elias didn't know yet what it would cost to stand against Silver Ridge again, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not bury another innocent under Whitmore's law, not this time. Elias Crowe did not plan on allies. Up on the mountain, alliances got you killed. Trust was something you rationed like ammunition, but Silver Ridge had a way of pulling men back into fights they swore they were done with. The first sign came 3 days after the gallows. A rifle crack echoed from the tree line just after dawn. Elias was outside splitting wood when the shot tore through the log inches from his hand. He didn't flinch. He simply stepped aside, drew his revolver, and scanned the slope. "Easy," a voice called out. "If I wanted you dead, you'd already be cold." A man emerged from the trees, tall but lean, wearing a weathered duster and a badge so worn it barely caught the light. His mustache was gray, his eyes sharp, and his right hand hovered close to his holster out of habit rather than threat. Marshal Thomas Hale. Once, years ago, Hale had been the law in Silver Ridge before Whitmore quietly stripped him of authority and replaced him with a sheriff who followed orders instead of truth. "You've got guts coming up here," Elias said flatly. Hale shrugged. "You got a problem coming down there." He explained quickly. The judge was furious. The execution had been spun as a rescue of stolen property. Warrants were being drafted. Deputies were being paid extra. And worse, Whitmore was leaning on the railroad men passing through, spreading word that Elias Crowe was dangerous, unstable, and worth a bounty if things got messy. "You embarrassed him," Hale said. "Men like Whitmore don't forgive that." Elias glanced back toward the cabin. Iris stood just inside the doorway, wrapped in wool, watching silently. The sight hardened his jaw. "I'm not running," Elias said. "I know," Hale replied. "That's why I'm here." Hale carried scars, too. One ran from his ear to his collar, courtesy of a knife meant to keep him quiet years earlier. He knew exactly what Whitmore was capable of, and he knew how the town would close ranks when threatened. "There's something you should see," Hale continued, pulling a folded document from his coat. "A ledger, mining transfers, debt notes, names Elias recognized, all marked as forfeited under Whitmore's authority. He's been laundering land through false convictions," Hale said. "Your brother wasn't the first, and Iris won't be the last." Elias exhaled slowly. "What do you want from me?" Hale met his gaze without blinking. "Testimony, proof, and someone who isn't afraid to pull the whole thing into daylight. That'll get people killed." "It already has," Hale said quietly. The wind cut between them. Snow creaked under boots. Somewhere in the valley below, Silver Ridge was preparing to pretend nothing had gone wrong. Hale turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. If Whitmore moves on the girl, he won't do it clean. He'll make it legal. That's how he wins." Elias watched him disappear into the trees, the weight of old choices settling back onto his shoulders. Inside the cabin, Iris asked the question she'd been holding back since the gallows. "Is this going to get worse?" Elias didn't lie. "Yes." She nodded once, steadier than he expected. "Then don't send me away," she said. "Let me stand with you." Elias understood then. This was no longer about rescue. It was about a deal with consequences. If Elias stayed, Hale would help him expose Whitmore. If Elias walked away, the mountain would stay silent. And silence was the one thing Elias Crowe refused to choose again. Silver Ridge did not strike back all at once. It tested the edges first. The first move came quietly. Too quietly. A week after Marshal Hale's visit, Elias rode down the eastern trail at dawn to trade pelts with a trapper who never missed an appointment. The clearing was empty, no smoke, no tracks, just the trampled snow and a dark stain frozen into the ground. Elias didn't need to kneel to know what it was. Blood. The trapper's mule was gone. So was his rifle. A message without words. Whitmore was letting him know that anyone who stood too close would be erased. When Elias returned to the cabin, Iris saw his face and didn't ask what had happened. She handed him water, then bread, then quietly began packing supplies without being told. That was the first change. She no longer waited to be instructed. She anticipated. The second move came faster. 2 nights later, shots rang out from the trees just after midnight. 3 men, poorly hidden, nervous. Deputies by the way they held their rifles, not hunters. Elias extinguished the lantern before they fired the second round. The mountain swallowed sound. Snow fell heavy. Elias moved through the dark the way he always had, circling, waiting. One man slipped on ice and fired blindly. Another shouted orders that echoed too loud. It was over in under a minute. One deputy fled downhill screaming. One lay unconscious in the snow with a broken wrist and a shattered pride. The third never made it back to town. Elias dragged the surviving man into the lantern light at dawn. "Tell Whitmore," he said calmly, cutting the man's bindings, "that next time he sends boys instead of men, he'll get them all killed." The deputy ran. By noon, Silver Ridge was buzzing. The sheriff declared Elias Crowe a violent fugitive. A bounty was posted. The number doubled by evening. The word runaway attached itself to Iris's name in the same breath as thief and madwoman. And still, Iris stayed. The third move came through Hale. He arrived bleeding, one sleeve dark with red, collapsing against Elias's fence just before dusk. "They tried to kill me on the pass," Hale rasped. "Stage ambush. Railroad men, paid well." Elias dragged him inside and stitched the wound while Iris boiled water and prepared bandages with steady hands. She didn't flinch at blood, didn't tremble. Her fear had changed shape. While Hale recovered, the truth spilled out. Whitmore was accelerating. Deeds were being signed. Families pushed off land. A trial scheduled in another county meant to quietly legitimize everything before winter ended. And at the center of it all was Iris. "She's leverage," Hale said. "If he gets her back, the rest vanishes." Elias looked at Iris across the table. "Then we don't let him get close," she said simply. The first true mission came 2 days later. A wagon carrying Whitmore's mining ledger was set to pass through Deadman's Cut. Hale needed it. Without those pages, everything stayed rumor. Elias didn't want Iris involved. She insisted. "I'm tired of hiding," she said. "If I don't walk this road now, I never will." They rode at dawn, the wagon appearing just before noon. 3 guards, armed, confident. The ambush was clean, too clean. Gunfire cracked, horses screamed. 1 guard dropped, another fled. The third turned his rifle on Iris. Elias fired first. The man fell backward into the ravine. When it was over, Iris stood frozen, smoke drifting from the barrel of the rifle Elias had placed in her hands minutes earlier. "You did nothing wrong," he told her. She nodded, then vomited, then wiped her mouth and climbed back onto the horse. The ledger was real. Hale confirmed it that night. Names, dates, false convictions, land theft, including Matthew Crowe's case, including Iris's confinement papers signed under medical authority. The noose was tightening, and Whitmore knew it. The fourth move was personal. They burned the lower cabin while Elias and Iris were gone fetching supplies. Flames devoured years of solitude. Tools melted, walls collapsed. But Whitmore made a mistake. He left tracks. Elias followed them into the valley at night, found the men drinking in a hunting shack, and ended the threat permanently. When he returned, blood frozen on his cuffs, Iris didn't recoil. She took his hands. "I know who you are," she said quietly, "and I'm still here." That night, Elias realized something terrifying. She was no longer the one he was protecting. She was the reason he kept going. The fifth move came with papers, a formal warrant, charges of murder, kidnapping, sedition, signed by Whitmore himself. The sheriff rode up under a white flag, shaking. "You have one chance," he said. "Bring her in. He might spare you." Elias laughed once. Iris stepped forward. "No," she said. "You tell him this ends soon, one way or another." The sheriff left pale and silent. The final escalation came with iron. A train arrived unexpectedly, carrying hired men, rifles, and a preacher ready to bless the violence as lawful correction. Silver Ridge was preparing for war. Elias sharpened blades. Iris packed food. Hale rode for reinforcements he wasn't sure existed. And in the quiet moments between preparation and bloodshed, Iris sat beside Elias by the fire. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes," he answered honestly. "So am I," she said, "but I'm not running anymore." Outside, the wind howled. Below, the town waited. Above, the mountain held its breath. Everything that had been buried was about to be dragged into the open. The truth didn't come screaming. It came softly, the way the worst realizations always do. At dawn, Elias stood alone near the tree line, watching the smoke curl up from Silver Ridge. Iris, was still asleep inside the cabin, exhaustion finally claiming her after days of fear and motion. The mountain was quiet, too quiet, like it knew something he didn't. That was when Marshal Hale returned. But he didn't come alone. 2 men rode behind him, well-dressed, clean boots, railroad men. Elias's hand went to his revolver, but Hale raised a palm. "Easy," he said. "You need to hear this." They dismounted, breath fogging the cold air. One of the railroad men produced a document, the seal pressed deep into the paper. A federal writ. Whitmore was finished, they said. The ledger had reached the right desk. Judges in Denver were already reviewing it. Arrest warrants were being prepared. Everything Elias had fought for was finally within reach. But there was a condition. "The girl must return to town," one man said carefully. "Publicly, alive, as proof she was never kidnapped." Elias felt something drop in his chest. "She won't survive that," he said flatly. "She will," Hale replied, "because Whitmore won't touch her. Not now, not with eyes watching." Elias stared at him. "Since when do you trust men like that?" Hale didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Since my brother died screaming in a cell while I waited for process that never came." The words cut deeper than a bullet. Hale continued, voice tight. "I didn't save him because I hesitated, because I wanted clean hands. I won't make that mistake again." Elias understood then. Hale wasn't betraying him. He was sacrificing Iris. The realization hollowed him out. When Iris woke, Elias told her everything. He didn't soften it. He didn't lie. She listened without interruption. When he finished, she surprised him. "I'll go," she said. "No," Elias snapped. "I will," she repeated, "because this ends if I do, because your brother deserves justice, because running forever is still a prison." He grabbed her hands, shaking. "You don't owe anyone that." "I owe myself," she replied quietly. "I spent my life being hidden. If this finishes in the open, then it means something." Hale watched from a distance, guilt carved deep into his face. The deal was struck. They would return to Silver Ridge at noon. Public square, train waiting, federal eyes present. Everything balanced on one moment. That night, Elias sat alone outside the cabin, revolver in his lap, wondering if he was about to lose the only person who had ever made the mountain feel warm. He had sworn never to kneel to men like Whitmore, and now he was walking straight into their arena. At dawn, Iris dressed carefully, not to please anyone, to stand tall. She took Elias's hand. "If this goes wrong," she said softly, "don't let them take you too." He nodded, unable to speak. As they rode down toward the town that had already tried to kill her once, Elias made his decision. If the law failed her again, he would, and this time he wouldn't stop at warnings. The bell rang once at noon. Silver Ridge stood frozen beneath a pale winter sun, every window open, every doorway crowded. Dust and snow mixed under boots as the town gathered in the square, drawn by rumor, fear, and the promise of an ending. The gallows still stood. Iris felt her breath catch when she saw it, but she did not stop walking. Elias rode beside her, silent, every muscle coiled. Marshal Hale dismounted first, his badge catching the light for the first time in years. Behind them, the train hissed and groaned, steam rising like a warning. 2 federal men waited near the platform, hands resting on leather folders instead of guns. Judge Cornelius Whitmore stepped forward. He looked immaculate, black coat, silver watch chain, calm smile, a man convinced the world would bend one last time. "My daughter," he announced, voice carrying, "has been returned safely. Order has been restored." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Iris stepped ahead of Elias before anyone could stop her. "No," she said. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "I returned myself." Whitmore's smile faltered. She turned slowly, facing the town that had watched her suffer in silence. "I was imprisoned in my father's house for 17 years, starved, bound, threatened with marriage to a man who terrified me, declared unwell because it was convenient." The sheriff shifted uneasily, eyes dropped, whispers spread. Whitmore raised a hand. "This is hysteria." A gunshot cracked, not from Elias. From Hale, the bullet shattered the gallows beam behind Whitmore's head, wood exploding into splinters. "Enough," Hale said. "This ends now." The federal agent stepped forward, unfolding the writ. "Judge Cornelius Whitmore, you are under arrest for land theft, falsified convictions, unlawful confinement, and conspiracy to commit murder." Whitmore laughed, desperate now, wild. "You think this holds?" he spat. "I own this town." "No," Iris said quietly. "You owned my silence." She pulled a folded paper from her coat. Her confinement order, signed, witnessed, proof. The crowd erupted. Whitmore lunged for Elias's gun. Elias moved first, one shot. Whitmore fell hard into the dirt, screaming, clutching a shattered knee. Dust rose, blood soaked into the ground he'd stolen from others. Elias didn't finish him. He stood over Whitmore, revolver steady, hand no longer shaking. "You don't get to die clean," he said. "You live knowing she survived you." The federal men moved in, irons clamping shut. As Whitmore was dragged away, Iris exhaled a breath she had been holding her entire life. The train whistle screamed, justice, loud and unavoidable. Elias turned to her, searching her face. She was still standing, still whole, still choosing him. The crowd parted as they walked away together, the gallows creaking uselessly behind them. This was the Wild West, and for once the rope missed its mark. Silver Ridge did not celebrate. It exhaled. The sheriff resigned before nightfall, leaving his badge on the desk like a confession. The bank closed within a week. Deeds were returned. Families who had lived in fear packed their wagons and stayed instead. Judge Whitmore was taken east in chains. No crowds followed him. No speeches were made. The man who once ruled the valley vanished into the system he had twisted for his own power. Some said he never spoke again. Others said he asked for his daughter every night until the guard stopped answering. Elias and Iris did not remain to watch the town heal. At dawn, they rode back toward the mountain, passing the same trail where fear had once driven Iris into the storm. This time, her back was straight. Her hands were steady. The burned cabin was rebuilt higher up the slope, stronger, warmer. People came quietly after that, not out of curiosity but need. Those with nowhere else to stand found a place beside the fire. At night, the mountain returned to its silence. But it was no longer empty. Out here, justice was never guaranteed by law books or men in fine coats. It was earned by those willing to stand their ground when silence would have been safer. Power tried to pass itself off as righteousness, but it always cracked when faced with truth spoken out loud. Sometimes survival is not about running faster or fighting harder. Sometimes it is about choosing to be seen, even when the world has taught you to hide. And now I ask you this. When you reach the end of this story, where were you and what were you doing? Tell me in the comments below.